We're live and we have 3 viewers. Yeah. Well, hello everyone who accepted their push notification. I am Jeremy Appel, the man behind the orchard, and I'm joined today by I think one of the most perceptive writers on the left in Canada, and prolific in terms of sort of the scope of issues he knows a lot about. Luke Savage is here on this live stream. You may know him as a frequent contributor to Jacobin, or more recently from his Substack, which, if you're not subscribed to, you should subscribe now. Go. Okay. Luke?
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm glad to be here. First Substack live, but so far no technical glitches. At least not any of you watching at home have seen.
Yeah. No, it's been totally smooth. No issues with invitation screw ups. Nothing. You're seeing. Um, and so the reason I wanted to bring Luke on is Luke has been writing a lot about Prime Minister Mark Carney. I've written, about this a bit too, but Luke, I think, is writes a lot about this sort of empty, hollow, centrist liberalism that I think we both agree Carney is really a major embodiment of. So we're going to talk about, his first several months as prime minister and sort of how it's shaped out and what it tells us about Mark Carney and what he actually believes. Um, and so, for starters, I don't think either of us really had high hopes for Mark Carney. I mean, we were both critics of Justin Trudeau from the left, and Carney comes in, and I remember, there's a whole right. Trudeau was like begging him to like join the government, right? And there was a whole will he or won't he saga pretty much throughout 2024, maybe even 2023. Right? It was long rumored he was going to bring him in to fix everything. And then I don't remember if this was shortly before or like immediately after Freeland did her attempted coup, I guess you could say, against Trudeau and refusing to deliver the economic update. Carney wrote this op-ed for the Globe and Mail. Do you remember it from December?
Which one was this?
It's like my New Year's resolutions for Canada.
Oh,
It was just a bunch of like pablum. Like, we need to work together to uh you know create solutions that everyone can live with. Yeah, that type of stuff, right? And then he of course said he wants to bring the Stanley Cup back to Canada. So and I remember thinking, like, okay, he's obviously running, but want to do. And I think there was one throwaway line in there about how something along the lines of the thing that he keeps saying now, that we need to spend less so we can invest more, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, so he's pivoting to the right. I mean, you saw signs of that with Freeland's dramatic, resignation letter, where she talked about, needing to keep our fiscal powder keg dry to face challenges from the Trump administration, right? So low expectations for Carney. He enters the liberal leadership race. Talks about reversing the carbon tax, which fine. I don't think either of us thinks the carbon tax is going to solve climate change, but it was something. Capital gains tax, all taxes that he said he was going to remove. So he comes to power. Much like he names a cabinet, but he pretty quickly calls an election, right? And we have this election, and it's I promise I will let you speak soon. And it's framed in very like existential terms, right? That this is about Canada's sovereignty, right? Standing up to against Donald Trump's uh, threat um, of annexing Canada. And Carney is gonna elbows up. He's gonna stand up to Trump. Um, Polyev just wants to do Trump's bidding. Of course, he had a lot of help, Carney, in creating that narrative from Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, who went on Breitbart and was like, yeah, Polyev's your guy. He wants what Trump wants, right? And then Carney comes to power, and again, I think we both expected him to reverse a lot of the meager progress Trudeau made, um, not stand up to the United States to the extent that he said he would. But it seems to me that it's been a lot worse than I expected. And I'm wondering what your perspective on that is. Did you expect Carney to cave as quickly and um, as he has thus far?
Uh, yes and no. I mean, I think in some ways, the direction of the government, broadly speaking, doesn't surprise me because, the signals, as you said, were there very early. As soon as you hear, a banker talking about how we need to spend less and invest more, I mean, it's very clear what it's very clear what that means. Even if as a piece of political rhetoric, it's very much a like having your cake and eating it too, which is why he phrases it like that. But I think that the speed at which and the kind of rapidity with which the Carney government has abandoned, I think really the two things that, broadly speaking, that gave it its mandate. One, allowed it to win the election and have this kind of spectacular electoral recovery for the Liberal Party. One was this promise to stand up to Donald Trump, and in the early months of this year, we saw all of these reciprocal tariffs, all of these counter tariffs. We saw Doug Ford threatening to switch off the lights in upstate New York, things that honestly at the time anyway. I mean, this isn't that long ago, but this felt to me like if one kind of mainstream centrist and center right politicians are talking this way and when they're thinking this way, these are the kinds of moments that they often contain a lot of progressive potential. And they're often kind of a precursor to something else. But that's not what Carney's been doing with Trump at all. In fact, Canada, I think, as of the middle of last month, about 4 weeks ago, has agreed not to do any more reciprocal tariffs. And all of these climb downs, it's ostensibly, it's 24-dimensional chess or whatever. But even on its own terms, this has been a failure, right? Because they don't have a deal. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, really was, I think, rhetorically anyway, a pretty explicit alignment with the idea of activist government. I think a lot of people thought they were basically voting for something kind of social democratic in Mark Carney. And what they heard in the two slogans that he made quite liberal use of during the election campaign. I mean, people may have heard different things, but I don't think they heard a sweeping program of austerity and cuts. First, he said Canadians need to become masters in our own house, which if you know anything about the history of Canada, the history of Quebec in the 1960s, that's a very pregnant phrase, right? This was the slogan that I believe it was the second election that the Quebec Liberal Party, which was at that time sort of the big kind of reforming and ideologically kind of social democratic party in Quebec in the 60s. Um, when they used it, they were talking about nationalizing hydroelectricity and things like that. Um, and the other phrase Carney kept using, which I think flew under the radar for most people, but just because of work I've been doing the past few years was not lost on me, is he kept talking about how Canada needs to take control of its economic destiny. And that's a phrase my late friend Ed Broadbent used a lot. And he launched the 1980 NDP campaign on that slogan, and what he meant was, a national industrial strategy. So using the federal government to actually discipline industry, discipline capital, direct the country's economic development. And again, whether people recognize the precise, the exact historical references there or not, I don't think anybody heard in those things, a sweeping program of cuts and a bunch of capitulations to Donald Trump. So, in some ways, I think the direction of the Carney government is surprising, given that they clearly had latitude to move in a different direction. They clearly had a mandate to move in a different direction. I think many people wanted them to. But in other ways, it's not surprising at all, right? Because if you look into Mark Carney, he's a banker, and he's his books and his arguments are those, they reflect a view of the world that is very uh, enmeshed in the supposed emancipatory potential of markets and in the dangers of reining them in. Um, and I guess just to include my thoughts here. I mean, he's always been very good, and I mean, I think in some ways he is a rather slick operator. He's always been very good at kind of softening the rhetoric of the kind of Davos sect from whence he comes, of really kind of blunting the edges of pro-market rhetoric and making it sound like something else. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that could be said here, but I'll let you come back in.
Yeah, no, but that I think lines up nicely with what I wanted to ask you next, which is his book that you read. You wrote a piece about it for the Baffler, um, and this book is called Values. And my understanding of it, as someone who hasn't read it but has read about it, is that he's framing his argument as yes, markets are great, they do wonderful things, right? Of course, he is a banker, but also we need to have values that exist outside the market, right? And I'm wondering how he sort of squares that circle in the book, or whether he does.
Yes, I mean, if people haven't seen the book, the title, it's values, but like the S is in brackets, and the implication is sort of like you have value in the market sense on the one hand, economic value. That's kind of the stand-in for capital. Then you have values, which are like those nice things that exist outside of the marketplace, and it's kind of you know inequalities and it's competition and all the rest of it. And the book is it's a very strange thing in many ways, because Carney, I don't want to give him too much credit, but he has a certain literacy around economic and philosophical concepts that I think is, I mean, again, one doesn't want to exaggerate it. It's like, I'm not that impressed that, the difference between like what Adam Smith thought about a rudimentary concept and what like David Ricardo or Karl Marx thought about the same concept. But nonetheless, he displays a much greater literacy about those sorts of things than somebody like Justin Trudeau would, right? Justin Trudeau, uh, didn't come to politics this way. He was, he believes fundamentally many of the same things Carney does, but the route he took to them was just that this was the received wisdom of kind of the people around him, and he didn't really think about it too much. Carney's not like that. Carney is somebody who, went to elite institutions and kind of imbibed their ideas and their kind of ideological frameworks, and so has a certain command of these things that somebody like a Trudeau would not have. Um, and if you don't read this book carefully, and it's easy not to, because particularly in the middle sections when it gets away from philosophy, um, and it's more just, there's sections about the COVID pandemic, the financial crisis, these sorts of things. It can be very dense. It can be very granular. It's not particularly exciting to read, and it's not as interesting to read as the first third. Um, but again, if you get through that, if you kind of wade through that swamp and reach the end, you'll see that he's thanking Michael Bloomberg and Christine Lagarde and all these kinds of people. And but only if you do that and you read carefully will you really notice that there's no there are no real prescriptions in this book that are specific enough to yield a view of markets that's actually critical. What Carney wants is for market actors, and he often refers to like the reader, um, like he'll refer to individuals and their firms, like as if that is kind of the stand-in for the average reader. It's like, I don't know about you, that's not how I kind of refer to, my friends or acquaintances or professional colleagues. But that's who Carney is fundamentally addressing in his book. And he basically wants these sorts of people to be a bit more compassionate in how they think. He wants them to, if you run a company, big or small, look into its carbon footprint, see what you can do about that. And scale that up to kind of global and multinational institutions. Let's have summits where we pass non-binding resolutions, and that sort of thing. That's how Carney has spent a lot of his professional career, and that's how he thinks. That's his conception of what politics is. So, if you want to say anything interesting about this book, if there's anything interesting to be said about it, it's that Carney is not unaware that there are things about markets that are imperfect, but having and kind of fundamentally amoral. But having reached that understanding, he's not willing to kind of grapple with any I don't know, any more serious criticisms of them, or really look to any world that tries to kind of fundamentally rein them in, let alone move beyond them.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I think it was an error on the part of the publisher not to spell values with a dollar sign instead of the brackets. But I guess, yeah, it seems like but and based on what you've written about this book, is Carney is fundamentally making a neoliberal argument in which the market exists outside of the political realm, right? That we have this market that is sort of this force of nature. What his writings is for, right? I think you've done a great job of describing like how markets and like business leaders can, sort of reflect their values through their enterprises. But what government in the view that Carney expressed in values?
I mean, I think this speaks to the other thing that's defined Mark Carney's career, which is that he's been somebody very close to kind of the nexus of power in the nexus, I suppose, connecting financial power and state power in his capacities as governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England. And I think from that, he has a fundamentally technocratic view of government and of the role of the state. He thinks that political problems are, they're technical problems in the same way that as, a central banker, he believed that, interest rates, uh, they're kind of those are kind of separate from politics. What you need is a skilled technician, someone like himself, who I don't know what you do. You go and meditate in the foothills of Kilimanjaro for a few
Go to
weeks, and
Burning
then
Man.
yeah, you go to Burning Man, and I don't know when you see the purple smoke, to mix my metaphors. You got to go pull the lever that makes the interest rate go up or down by 0.2 or 3%. It's uh, yeah. Fundamentally, he sees governance, I think, as an enterprise of elite technicians. And sure, they go to electorates every few years, and they ask for permission or assent to kind of keep governing. But I think when you have a fundamentally elitist view of politics like this, I think you regard that process as kind of like secondary or obligatory. That's the bread and circuses for the people that don't know about interest rates and derivatives and bond markets and all the other really fascinating things that you know about. And so I think that's why Carney had no problem, embracing the rhetoric of the Quiet Revolution or stealing slogans from Ed Broadbent, and then not, following through on them. I think kind of, governing and campaigning are completely, in some ways, completely distinct things to him, and so I don't think he particularly cares about the obvious contradictions there.
Yeah, and moving into sort of I guess you could say the Carney doctrine in practice. I've written about how quite early too. This might, I think, been shortly after the election, or maybe when he unveiled his first cabinet. Um, but this is really like seems like a reversion to the sort of um, 90s business liberalism of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin and um, Romanow in Saskatchewan. Almost makes me almost nostalgic for Justin Trudeau, who I mean did if you look at something like reconciliation, I mean, no prime minister um, for Indigenous issues than Justin Trudeau, and that's because the bar is so low, right? And same thing for climate. I mean, again, he, established a framework for an emissions cap that now looks like Carney is going to kibosh. EV mandate that now looks like Carney's going to kibosh. Um, clean electricity mandate, which it does look like Carney is sticking with. So there were these very piecemeal things that you and I were both very critical of at the time. Today, it does seem it's better than nothing and just surrendering to the forces of like global finance and US empire. What's your take? Like, how do you think the way Carney has governed has um, how we might look at someone like Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be said here. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, where to begin here? I mean, I guess start with Trudeau and Carney themselves, and I was kind of getting at this before. I mean, I think Justin Trudeau is somebody who got into politics because ever since he was a child, ever since he was, a child at the most elite private schools in the country, and so on. People have told him like you're going to be prime minister one day, right? He's a classic sort of aristocratic or patrician kind of politician who acts out of sort of noblesse oblige and a sense that, yes, he comes from this class that, is more enlightened and more virtuous and so on. But that gives him like certain obligations, and he has to he has to act to help the less fortunate. It's also in its own way obviously a very elitist view of politics, but it does afford someone like Trudeau, who's not a thinking liberal in quite the way Carney is, I think, a measure of perhaps ideological flexibility that someone like Carney doesn't have. Right, when you learn your politics that way, and you sort of imbibe them as opposed to like as Carney did, going to the world's most elite universities and so on. Uh, yeah, you don't actually know what you believe quite as much. Whereas if you're Carney and you come from a middle class, relatively middle class background, and then you've kind of like successfully climbed the ladder of the global elite, and you've had to learn all of these things. I think it makes you more ideologically rigid in some ways. So when it comes to them and their kind of leadership styles, I think uh, that's what I would say. That's my working assumption about the difference between them. Anyway, I have to think more about it. When it comes to their governing styles, I mean, I know what you mean, and I don't want to send us down a rabbit hole of kind of relitigating the whole Trudeau era. Um, Obviously there was often a more center leftish kind of bent of that government than we're seeing with Carney. But it did, you know, in it, there were good things like the Canada Child Benefit, and other things we could name, but it was. Trudeau turned like much of the federal government over to McKinsey and Company. He his infrastructure program. It actually there's a direct parallel with Carney. In 2015, Trudeau won on this kind of like anti-austerity message, and then all of this kind of unspecified social expenditure that they had touted during the campaign and used to kind of outflank the NDP when it came to spending. They ended up creating a private infrastructure bank. It's a financing model in many ways very similar to what Carney wants to do now. Use public money to attract private capital. Isolate private capital from risks, often in contexts where like there actually isn't a business case for something. So the government is just subsidizing uh, inefficiency, or in the case of where the Carney government's moving, pipelines that we're not going to or shouldn't uh, be making use of, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, because we need to be moving away from the thing that they're carrying. So there's a lot of similarities between them. Differences could be recognized as well, could be discussed in detail. I think to me, what's fundamentally different about the two of them is more kind of their personal trajectories and the leadership style has kind of created in each of them. Like ideologically, in many ways, they are actually very similar.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a sense in which Carney has succeeded in sort of reviving this Trudeau brand, but with a new face for the mid 2020s. I mean, you talked about the infrastructure bank, for example, which was like, yes, we are going to invest in infrastructure and build out. And that's like, oh, of course, we're just giving money to private actors to do it for us. And you see that now with housing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they made, I mean, housing wasn't the top issue in the past election, as the conservatives had, hoped it might be, because the liberals had failed so spectacularly on it. But Carney was like, yeah, we're going to get the government involved in housing again, which was what Trudeau said too. And then again, his housing policy largely consisted of subsidies to developers, and now we see Carney, creating this centralized government organization to build housing, like after the Second World War. Oh wow, that's compelling. And then it's like, oh, we're going to work with the private sector to build homes, right? Um, so yeah, I think there are certainly and probably more similarities than differences between Carney and Trudeau. Again, I'm not nostalgic for Trudeau, almost, but not quite. Um, as you think about it more, it's like, Lucy with the football, right? Like, yeah, 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 we are going to build, the Canadian nation again. We've heard that before, and it amounted to just a different way of delivering the same old neoliberal slop. Um,
Actually, if I could make a point on that, this is a little bit of a digression, but I think it's relevant. It's important to note here that the way Carney talks about nation building, where nation building means cuts, it means harmonizing our institutions, economic, political, and so on, with global market forces. That does actually have a lineage in Canadian politics going back to at least the 1960s. In those days, there was a more kind of pan ideological concern about, you know, Canada's its growing economic integration with the United States. There were lots of nationalists. I mean, there were people who thought of themselves as Canadian nationalists in all three major parties. And one of kind of leading liberal nationalists was Walter Gordon, who was a cabinet minister in Pearson's government. Walter Gordon actually commissioned a very what became a very or he encouraged Pearson, got Pearson to commission what became a very influential report about American ownership, which was chaired by the political economist Mel Watkins, who later, was involved in the NDP, went on to co-found the Waffle. So, you know, uh, Walter Gordon was in many ways a committed nationalist, but in the mid 70s, he published a book called Storm Signals, which was kind of like his blueprint for saving Canada. And his solution to the problem of American economic encroachment and the economic underdevelopment this was bringing in Canada was, one, to have Parliament pass like a resolution or a motion, something non-binding. I can't quite remember exactly what it was. That was going to just ask the largest U.S. corporations to sell off their Canadian shares voluntarily. There was no enforcement mechanism except like Parliament asked you nicely. And who are they going to sell them to? Not to the Canadian public, not to the Canadian state. They were going to sell them to, just Bay Street, essentially. And all of Gordon's other suggestions in that book were like, we need to be more economically patriotic by banning strikes in the public sector. We need wage controls, this kind of thing. And I bring up Gordon because I think, unlike Carney, he actually was a much more sincere economic nationalist in some ways. He was actually genuinely worried about the threat of American economic encroachment, American economic domination. But because he was a liberal, he just thought, he had this particular view of markets, and you don't move beyond them. You can't use the state, and you can't have social ownership. You can't have nationalization. So that left him with only one kind of trajectory to suggest, which in many ways is similar to the one that Carney is pursuing now.
yeah, I think the parallels are quite clear, and I mean that's the thing with nationalism, right? It's something that people in power can wrap themselves in, that provides a supposedly higher meaning to a project that is at its core materialist and empty. Um, I think though, just to sort of move along to the past. I guess Carney's been prime minister now for what, 8 months, 9 months, but he's really been doing things for the past 5 months or so, right, since the after the election. And I guess there are three things that I would say might point towards this Carney doctrine, or Carneyism, as you've called it. um the first being, as we've alluded to, massive public sector austerity. That you really have to go back to the Harper, even Chrétien era, to get a parallel with. I mean, Trudeau did to some extent put the brakes on that. Um, Military, like unprecedented militarization. Um, it often been or neoliberal, neoconservative stuff. But then you have this sort of to build these big infrastructure projects, right, and to push them through, and these projects that are deemed in the national interest. And that's something that I think is interesting, and something that I think a liberal partisan would say that's what he promised to do. He promised to like build, right? And so maybe with the infrastructure stuff, right? Because that I think has been in the news the most lately. Um, is building these projects that are deemed in the national interest that get fast tracked. First Nations were very critical of this act um, because in its original form, it explicitly allowed regulations under the Indian Act to be ignored when building these projects. They since took the Indian Act out of the laws that people building these infrastructure projects can break, but there's still a ton of other environmental regulations that are intimately tied to treaty rights that can be taken out of the equation. And um, right now, there's been some mining projects, some renewable energy project, I believe, on the East Coast, LNG in BC, and this major carbon capture project here in Alberta, which was really, I mean, it was stalled under Trudeau, and it's the biggest oil companies in Canada who are demanding the government give them billions of dollars. And what about this is the way Danielle Smith has described uh, her policy of subsidizing this carbon capture and then later building a new pipeline to northern BC. Um, right, I mean Northern Gateway pipeline was quashed by the courts. Pre Trudeau, and Trudeau nixed it. And now apparently it's coming back. But Smith has described this as a grand bargain with this because I'm like, what bargain? What are we getting out of it? Like it's like oil, big oil, carbon capture contraction that isn't going to work to the extent they say it will, but might help them reduce like emissions per barrel. Then they're also getting this pipeline that allows them to increase production. So even any mild emissions that they get through carbon capture are going to be canceled out by this pipeline. And, um, Carney was always known as the climate banker, right? That was this image he cultivated, right? And of course, he signed off on a UN report that said, yeah, we need to start keeping fossil fuels at the ground. Like we can't expand fossil fuel infrastructure. Now that he's in power, he's expanding fossil fuel infrastructure again in tar sands, LNG in BC. Um, and yeah, I'm wondering that sort of fits into, I guess, what Carney talks about in theory and what Carney is doing in practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously in Canada, a lot of this becomes tied up in the specific politics around pipelines and jurisdiction and all of these other things that are part of our part of our politics, part of our political culture. But I think what Carney, is pursuing with all of this is very much in the spirit of there's a wider zeitgeist among kind of liberals throughout the Atlantic world that you see in things like the so-called abundance movement in the United States. I don't know if Carney has read this book, Abundance. He probably has, but at times he's said things that sound to me like they're lifted directly from the pages of that book. And Abundance is fundamentally making the argument that uh, the reason that valuable infrastructure, vital infrastructure, hasn't been built. So high speed rail is something they talk a lot about in that book. That's Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Housing, these sorts of things, is basically there's just too many constraints on private industry. There's too many regulatory burdens. And people have looked into particular case studies they cite in the book, and obviously these are American, but they found in many cases these things simply aren't true. So they love Ezra Klein loves bringing up this example of a Biden era public telecom policy where they're going to build all this public Wi-Fi infrastructure, but there were so many regulatory burdens that like all this money's been spent and people don't have their free Wi-Fi. Well, it turns out, in fact, what happened is that big telecom companies who don't want a public network to compete with, so your Verizons and so forth, they lobbied and they managed to throw up a whole bunch of obstacles to this program, and they got the legislation altered, I believe, before it was passed. And that's just one example, but you know, I find it extremely implausible, and I kind of just reject it as a broad principle that the reason we don't have, like, the story of why we don't have, say, abundant affordable housing or high speed rail, that the story there is fundamentally one of like overregulation and the government stifling opportunities for those things to be built. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it varies from sector to sector, but corporate capture, the financialization of the housing market, these kinds of things, like these are fundamentally why we have a housing crisis. Chronic underinvestment, like there's been for decades now falling levels of social expenditure as a percentage of GDP in Canada, and broadly speaking, in many liberal democracies. I think these are that's what's actually going on. But abundance, which is really the new hotness, like a lot of people are reading this book, not just the United States, and kind of taking on its arguments. Its innovation is that they Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson kind of figured out a way to tell this story and have it sound like they were telling a different story than just the one we've all been hearing for the past 30 or 40 years. They talk about supply side liberalism. They use a lot of language that's just, build stuff, get things built. That sounds great. They're evasive about what they think the role of the state is in all this as well. And so that's helped, I think, create a sort of progressive sounding register for what is fundamentally just more neoliberal policymaking, and that's basically what Carney's doing.
Yeah, I would bet a lot of money that Carney has read Abundance, and he's like, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? And at the same time, we have the Canadian government sort of reducing the regulatory burden for these big infrastructure projects, including those that are going to destroy the planet. And a couple wind farms that won't do nearly enough to offset it. What happened to those 2 billion trees Trudeau said he was going to plant?
I don't know. I lost count. I don't know how many they planted.
Yeah, I maybe a million. I don't know. But yeah, those might come in handy now. So we have that on the one hand, and also a lot of these projects, of course, are going to be subsidized by the federal government to private industry, right? Obviously, I mean, it goes without saying. I think the pipeline. I know David Eby in BC is saying, "Well, let the private sector do it if they want it," right? but carbon capture, that's going to get subsidized. Um, high speed rail, which is one of the more promising infrastructure projects that again he's mixed up with all the fossil fuel expansion. I mean that's going to be privately owned and operated, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, and paid for by citizenry. So you have that on the one hand, right? These big infrastructure projects that benefit big corporate interests, while probably having some effects on people like you and me, like high speed rail. Well, that's more for you. I don't live in the corridor, but hopefully one day. And obviously people will be working in LNG or in wind or at the carbon capture facility in Cold Lake. But I'm really the main beneficiaries, as always, are capital, right? So, and Carney did this thing right during the election. He was like, "Look, we're going to split our budget into, uh, an operating, but it's just sort of like, yeah, operating in a capital budget. We're going to cut the operating budget and we're going to increase capital spending, right? So these big infrastructure projects will get through, but then services that the rest of us depend on, I mean, are going to get slashed. And I know there's some confusion, including on my part, on as to the percentage of cuts Carney was pursuing over 3 years. It is, I believe, 15%. It's not a third,
We're
based
not
on.
going to know. We're not going to know until they've tabled their budget. As far as I understand it, the 15% is just a target that the Ministry of Finance sent to every department except for border services and military and a few other things. But most government departments were told to find 15%, savings and efficiencies. And so whether they're actually intending to cut that much, we'll have to see. But certainly, I mean, honestly, even cut even a 5% across the board cut would be, would be extremely profound. So, you know, uh, yeah, whatever it is, it's going to be very significant. I think we'll know more specifically when they table their budget in early November.
Yeah, and I mean, again, 15%. I mean, that's more than Harper cut at the height of
Yeah,
his austerity, right? Like,
yeah.
you do have to go back to Chrétien, Martin, which were bigger cuts. But again, I I suspect this is a floor, definitely not a ceiling, right?
Mm.
Um, so we've got that, and at the same time, and I wrote about this recently in Toronto Star. You've got Evan Solomon, everyone's favorite journalist come art broker, who sold art to Mark Carney, by the way, um, is now the AI and digital innovation minister. And actually, I've got another gig I do sometimes where there's this company that the federal government contracts to record and transcribe like press events. So they have people all over the country they'll send and go to like government announcements and stuff. So I went to one last week, right? Because they're in Edmonton for the caucus retreat, right? And it was at this AI company that actually is right by where I live. I live downtown, called Amy. So the like Artificial Machine Intelligence Institute or something. And um, and spoke there, as did Eleanor Olszewski, the one Liberal MP in Edmonton, Patty Haidu, who's the Jobs, not Labor minister. And Talib Nur Mohammed was there, who I believe is the parliamentary secretary to Solomon. And I mean, just, again, I've been reading the interviews Solomon's been doing about AI, which is my jaw dropping. But seeing him speak in person, that guy is a complete snake oil salesman. I mean, is I mean, just and you just look at his career trajectory and the way he's failed upwards is really gobsmacking. And now he said like, yeah, we're going to regulate AI a bit, right? Yes, a light touch, but we don't want to get left behind. And this is some really great technology. And I don't know if you caught that. He told McLean's that he was using, I think, Gemini to take the previous liberal government's digital privacy legislation, and summarize it to him in podcast form, and so he can just listen to it on the way to work. And and, and that's how he's learning about old legislation and how can build on it. And David Reevely, I believe his name is, at the Logic Reporter, I'll see how that works. Let's see how accurate it is. And so he did it 3 times. He got Gemini to create a podcast based on this legislation that wasn't passed. And 2 out of 3 times, it got key details wrong. And then Logic reached out to Solomon's office. They're like, oh, he's not just listening to a podcast generated by AI to get his get his briefings on old legislation. He's also reading it, which is like, well, okay, you could just read it instead. Like, um, um, and yeah, and I mean, again, they signed a contract with oh my, that the Toronto-based company, uh in San Francisco, right? So kind of an embodiment of this transnational uh, tech class. Help find efficiencies in the public sector through AI. And turns out Cohere is a close partner of Palantir. For viewers who aren't familiar, it's Peter Thiel's company that is, a major military and defense contractor. But a big project they're working on now is to use AI algorithms to create this database of people in America and target those who aren't citizens for deportation, right? Um, Also, they gave them hundreds of millions of dollars to build a data center in, I believe, in Cambridge, Ontario, well, somewhere in the like Kitchener Waterloo, tech hub area. And they gave that money to an American company to build this, and so there's no, and I find it interesting, this combination of this tech boosterism with these cuts to the public sector, and how like it feels like we're just outsourcing services that people we depend on in how they're going to operate to an algorithm, and I mean that's frightening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't been following the AI stuff as closely as you obviously have, but as soon as there was, the creation of this new ministry, I mean, of course, there's a different world where, you have you have this new technology, software, whatever you want to call what the tech industry is calling AI. I put it in scare quotes because it's not, it's something. It's not intelligence, but regardless, there's a different world where a new ministry is created for that because it's recognized that this is going to be introduced. This is going to be something people are using. It may actually have perfectly legitimate uses in terms of saving people time. It may actually help make certain processes more efficient. But that's not what this is, right? This is the bring it on, the same bring it on ethos we're seeing everywhere else. This is, well, like, Evan Solomon could have gone to any number of career civil servants in his department, who would have had the institutional memory and the institutional knowledge to give him briefings, probably quite good and detailed briefings about the government's past legislation. But he outsourced it to Gemini, and Gemini got it wrong. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of risks inherent in this. And I think it's going to be used as a crutch as well. Like a lot of it's not actually going to work even on its own terms, but it's going to be used as a crutch um, to rationalize the firing of lots and lots of civil servants, basically. And I mean the possibilities for error. I mean, if like a newly appointed cabinet minister is listening to AI podcasts to be briefed on his own file, I mean the possibilities for really serious error and I mean potentially disaster are they're very real. So yeah, not sure how to conclude that thought. It's but it's very scary.
Yeah, I just feel like it seems to me that this can only end with like the CRA getting outsourced to a chatbot. And I mean, no one likes dealing with CRA as is. People who work there are, professionals who know what they're doing. There just isn't enough of them. And well, you know, 15% cuts over 3 years. I mean, that's a lot of CRA employees that, pesky unionized. I think that's another detail um,
Yeah.
in this too. That civil service is largely unionized, right? At least the parts that haven't been like outsourced to McKinsey, right? Um, and, that this tech boosterism and combined with these cuts to um, people's jobs who deliver actual services that vulnerable people depend on, combined with these big infrastructure projects that will benefit capital, is a really dangerous recipe, and it's very the prospects coming from that I think are very bleak. Um,
Yeah, I agree, and I also think I mean, again, we don't know what's going to be in the budget yet, but I think the political dynamic that seems to be emerging, you know, Poilievre and now Poilievre's back in Parliament, Parliament's returned, and we've kind of got a glimpse of what kind of the rapport between him and Carney looks like. This is kind of a perfect storm to me. It's very noxious cocktail because the federal deficit is going to be quite high. Um, Even though, in many respects, the Carney government is going to be doing things that a Poilievre government, I'm sure, would have been doing. There's even a few areas, people could dispute this. Perhaps there's a few areas where I think the Liberals might even be willing to move further and or quicker than a conservative government might. But that's beside the point. The deficit is going to be very high. And that's large, that's going to be because of all the military expenditure. It's going to be because of tax cuts and these sorts of things. But the conservatives are going to stick with their narrative, right? Poilievre, albeit in a different way, is also a very ideologically grounded politician. And he kind of only has one mode, right? And it's to say that the liberals are tax and spend, and all of their taxing and spending is what's making your life harder, more expensive. It's what's making food expensive. It's why you can't afford a home. It's why your wages haven't increased in real terms for years, et cetera, et cetera. And so, even if Carney is moving in a very right wing kind of direction, Poilievre is still going to be saying that. And with the NDP having only 7 seats in Parliament, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be harder for people to see that there's actually there's a different way of approaching these questions. Like these are not the only two options. What's at stake in our politics is not just like, do you want neoliberalism with right wing culture war attached, or do you want it with do you want it without that? I mean, there's so many of the things we've talked about today. There are much better options the federal government could be pursuing, and they are not going to have the space in the national conversation that they perhaps deserve.
Right. And then there's one more layer, of course, on top of this is, as you mentioned, this massive military buildup, the likes of which we've never seen. I mean, already, Carney said this year we're getting to 2% of GDP on military spending, which was the old NATO target. that is going to require us to increase military spending by like 50% because we're around like 1.3, 1.4%. And then long term, we're going to get to 5%, which is tied into the infrastructure too, right? Because NATO agreed that I think maybe 2% or is can be infrastructure projects that could have military uses. You know, there you go. And what one thing I found very frustrating about this is the amount, and again, this is probably me spending too much time on Blue Sky, but when you critique this and you point out that this is gonna, I mean, this is you're taking money from poor people and the services they rely on, and you're giving it to mostly American defense contractors. You know, people will be like, "You idiot! Don't you understand that this is all to stand up to Trump? We need to boost our military so that we can like stave off a US invasion." And it's like we could spend 100% GDP on military spend. We could only spend on military, right? We could have just like a total like libertarian like night watchman state and we wouldn't stand a chance against the US. Like sorry, like that's just the reality. It's not ideal. I'm not happy about it, but those are the facts. But
Well, we would have to we couldn't stave off the initial invasion. I think what we could do is we could turn the elbows up movement into some kind of like Viet Cong style paramilitary organization, you know, taking up positions at the nation's community centers and Tim Hortons is, you know, kind of like scenes reminiscent of the film Canadian Bacon. But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. The observation you're making because uh, the idea that we should build up our military sounds like it's this is kind of some form of resistance to Trump, or it's a way of pursuing autonomy from the United States. Because, well, you know, hey, we'll take care of our own defense and security responsibilities if the Americans aren't going to do that anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, Donald Trump has specifically demanded that Canada increase its military spending, right? So much of the ethos of Trump 2.0 is shaking down allied countries, um, you know, basically to come to the king and ask for favored status, to do things that the United States or the Trump administration doesn't want to do itself. And of course, as you already pointed out, this, you know, even if you accept the logic of this massive increase in military spending, it's very hard to do this without like the procurement is going to much of it's going to come through the United States. So if the whole point is to build, you know, a more autonomous economy and to assert Canadian sovereignty, this is really doing uh, the opposite. I mean, I'd have objections too if people say, well, let's build up our own, you know, domestic arms industry, which, by the way, is something the Trudeau government pursued quite aggressively. Arms exports increased considerably under the Trudeau government, but so you know, there are problems with having a domestic arms industry, as well as you know the past 60, 70 years of the United States are a testament to. Um, but yeah, I mean, this fails even on its own terms because it's yet another concession to Trump. It's the opposite of what you know, one of the major things on which the Carney government won its mandate.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like what do these people think NATO is? Like NATO's not going to defend us if like NATO is an instrument of American power. If America's not part of NATO, there is no NATO. It's not a thing, right? And so the idea that you know, it's just this game of 3D chess that the head of NATO is literally called Trump daddy, like he's Milo Yiannopoulos, you know, and
Ah,
that that d- putting more money into this extortion racket is going to protect us from the United States is absurd. And I think it's because a lot of people, I mean, you know, certainly in our life, times. This is unprecedented, the relationship with the United States. And, you know, it's easy to think of a worst case scenario, you know, a decade or two down the road where like we become Ukraine to America's Russia, right? And, you know, we try and pursue relations with other powers that located across the world, China, you know, or India, for example. And then the US is like, you can't do that. And then, you know, invades. It's not inconceivable, right? I don't think we're at that point now. I think it's going to be much more economic and pressure through the tariffs. But yeah, I mean, I guess my point is no one's coming to save us. And um, you know, you look at this border bill. You mentioned things that Carney's doing that might even go further than what a conservative government would do. I mean, this certainly goes further than anything Harper and Kenney did on the border. Um, does it go further than what Polyev would want to do? I don't know, but I think it is what you'd want to do. Carney's just not beating his chest and saying, yeah, we're going to deport students if they write something critical of Israel or something. But in that legislation, it allows them to revoke visas for whatever reason they want, right? Again, I mean, there's just so much wrong with that piece of legislation um, that deals with the border, that allows you know, makes it easier for you know, Canada Post to open our mail, for you know, mostly US based, again, tech companies to hand over our data. Um, yeah, and I think that is also sort of a key part of, I guess, what we could say is a Carney doctrine. We've got austerity for the many. We've got this abundance agenda for big capital projects. Um, we've got this embrace of big tech and militarization, right? And I mean, I don't know how different that makes Carney from your like bog standard neoliberal empty suit, just updated for the 2020s, right? With this added element of tech and the sort of threat from this US empire that seems to be wanting to just bring everything down with it. Um, but one thing, and maybe this will be the last question because I know we've gone pretty long, but I wanted to ask you because you follow British politics, I think, closer than I do, certainly, and you hear a lot of Carney's critics from the left say, you know, many of them probably voted for him. Let's be real, which is, you know, people make mistakes. It's fine. Um, say that Carney is our Keir Starmer, right? And Starmer, I know, is in deep trouble now with his own party. His grip on power seems, from what I've been reading in like The Guardian and FT, you know, somewhat precarious. Um, Obviously, that's not the case for Carney, right? He's got his caucus, at least publicly, united behind him. And I mean, the caucus is so big, you can have you know, a dozen MPs who don't like him, and it doesn't matter. Um, but what do you make of that comparison? That Carney is like this Keir Starmer like figure.
I think there's an obvious sense in which it's true, and there's very clear parallel because I think the direction of that government, which has obviously been in power for longer. I mean, or you know, Starmer himself, he became prime minister, I think, in August of 2024. But you know, its kind of governing ethos was or has been, yeah, just you know, bring it on, harmonize, you know, turn the treasury over to BlackRock, you know, harmonize, you know, our institutions with global market forces. they have, they've similarly kind of taken on a very like supplicating attitude towards Donald Trump. And yeah, their major priority has been to reassure financial markets, and to restore market confidence and that sort of thing. Um, but one shouldn't exaggerate the parallels. Obviously, the political contexts are different, right? So Starmer came to power with a very weak popular mandate, 33 something percent, and yet this massive majority because of the vote inefficiency of the other parties. Um, his approval ratings were very low, and people were not excited. It was more just, well, the Tories have been in power for 18 years, and he kind of just won by default. Um, Starmer is also, I think, a uniquely inept politician. He is an absolutely clueless figure. I mean, just a kind of just a pure creature of certain parts of the British state. I mean, he is a total cipher who is just pliable to forces around him, particularly spin doctors and political operatives and that sort of thing. And he's going to be gone in months, weeks, days, possibly hours. Who knows? Carney, I think, is a bit of a slicker operator than Starmer. He also, he rescued the Liberal Party, right? He engineered this big polling recovery. Starmer actually did the opposite. Starmer said, the Corbyn era, that's over. The adults are in charge. I'm forensic. This is what competent uh, center left politics looks like, and it's been the total opposite of that. Um, I don't want to exaggerate Carney's political skills. I think there's a lot that we don't actually know about him. I think the best thing you can say is that his political judgment was good enough that, there have been rumors about him entering politics for 10, even 15 years, and he waited and he picked the exact right moment where a guy like him had political appeal, which was in the immediate aftermath of the 2024 US presidential election, and like a few very specific things that Donald Trump said, and the like abrupt departure of Justin Trudeau. Without that context, I don't think Carney would have had the same appeal. But the political context, I suppose, might be different. Fundamentally, these are both kind of right-leaning liberal governments, and they do have a lot in common. I think substantively about kind of their theory of governance and how they've been going about things.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're stuck with Carney for you know, at least however long this minority government lasts. I mean, I don't think the party's going to turn on him, because I mean, you saw how he turned around their fortunes. I think again, it was temporary and a response to external circumstances. Um,
Well,
and
there's also, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, there's also no party, right? As we learned with Trudeau, who was unpopular for years, but there was no mechanism to remove him. Like it took months and months of kind of like press, sniping, and like leaked open letters, and then finally Chrystia Freeland resigning, to bring that about. But like, even if Carney was unpopular, it's hard to imagine the Liberal Party removing him, because they don't really have a mechanism to do so, and what they stand for at any given time, uh, they seem to be an entirely leader centric brand, even more than they were before.
yeah, I mean, and that is, I think, a similarity with the Democrats under Obama. This sort of uh, cult of personality that the party was centered around, that I think clearly influenced the people behind Trudeau, right? And yeah, I mean, the conservatives, I believe, are the only party that actually have that mechanism to turf a leader if the caucus wants it, which is what happened with Aaron O'Toole. But yeah, I mean, I think another parallel is, again, don't follow British politics nearly as closely as you or, anyone who's like British, of course. But It seems like Reform UK is shaping up to be a major contender for power, and we've seen the Conservatives under Polyev to avoid the circumstances that the UK Tories find themselves in, has really embraced those, populist, elements within their coalition, knowing that, at the end of the day, the people who are turned off by that populism, I mean, can be bought with tax cuts, right? And you saw this in Alberta with Danielle Smith, who a lot of people were like, yeah, in Calgary, for example, are like, yeah, I don't like the anti-vax stuff. I don't like the separatist stuff, but she's going to cut my taxes, right? And, there's always a constituency for that. And yeah, and I think also, I mean, with the Liberal Party, it's the opposite of the UK, where the Tories were in power forever. I mean, now the Liberals have been in power for a decade, right? And it seems like that surge that Polyev had. I mean, what Carney did was delay it, right? I think delay the inevitable. Um, and yeah, so it looks like uh in any event, Carney's doing, as we established, a lot of what Polyev would be doing anyways. So yeah, no, prospects for Canadian politics look bleak right now. I mean, we'll see what happens with the NDP leadership race, which you know, we could spend another hour and a half discussing, and maybe we will once there are actually official candidates. But yeah, this is a great talk, Luke. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon and um, sharing your knowledge with me and the audience here.
Well, tell you what. So that we don't conclude on such a bleak and sour note, let's nothing's inevitable here, right? The current dynamic, I mean, based on everything we've discussed, is not particularly auspicious. But the fact is, Carney did win an election, because there were substantial numbers of Canadians uh, who want an actual agenda of progressive nation building, who want the federal government to get back into the business of building affordable housing, who, when they heard infrastructure, were not thinking of pipelines, they were thinking of perhaps publicly owned high-speed rail, who wanted, a government that was going to stand up to Donald Trump. And I think that constituency very much still exists. I think in many ways, in important ways, it's a majority constituency in Canada. So I'm optimistic. Remain optimistic, if not in the short term or immediate term, and then in the medium term, and perhaps in the long term as well. I mean, we have 90 people still watching. We could do some rapid fire questions. I'm game to, if we shouldn't take too much longer, but I'm game to if you are.
Yeah. If anyone has questions, now's your chance.
Hit us with it, guys. While you're doing that, while you're typing, I'm just gonna plug the cable in on my phone here, so I don't lose you
I
all.
should probably get my charger too. Yeah, I got 15%.
I'm down to 13, so I'm gonna be gonna
Yeah.
gonna plug in just to be safe. By the way, since you mentioned Palantir earlier, fun fact if people don't know this, but the origin of the company name is Peter Thiel's love of Lord of the Rings, and in
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, the Palantir is it's like the big like sphere or orb that like Saruman uses to spy on the people of Middle Earth, and I think like Sauron does too. So it's pretty audacious to just name your company that. It's like, yeah, we spy.
Yeah, and it's interesting how all these like tech barons, like Elon Musk, and I mean, yeah, Lord of the Rings isn't sci-fi, but it's fantasy, and they absorb this literature that is supposed to be cautionary, and they're like, no, 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 this is actually really cool and the way things should be, right? Um, you know, like something like Neuromancer, like I can see Mark Zuckerberg reading that and being like, this is so cool. What's the problem here? This is the metaverse, right? And yeah, it's really interesting. But anyways, the Revolution Party of Canada, they had a candidate, not in my riding, but in the riding next door that is now Eleanor Olszewski's riding as liberal. I don't know if they ran anyone in your riding, Luke, or but they're I believe a new party. Correct me if I'm wrong, and they've got a question that a bit self-serving, but I get it, and it's an interesting one. So if the NDP go towards the center, what is the best strategy to fill their former space on the left? Um,
It's the best strategy is
yeah, Luke, you're the
insurrectionary.
NDP guy
It's
here.
insurrectionary Maoism, obviously. I don't know why this is even a
Yes.
question. I mean, I don't know the premise of the question here. I think it's. I mean, we don't know, right? Because the NDP leadership race hasn't really started. I would be very surprised if like the federal NDP moves like to the center. I just don't think that's where the membership of the NDP is at. I don't think that's where like that's not where the even just like in terms of the political opportunities, that's not where the opportunities are, right? The Carney tilt to the right has like potentially creates a lot of space that the NDP can fill. That would be my take on that. As for the other question from the same person, uh, yeah, the Your Party in the UK, which is the still nascent vehicle that Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn have kind of got started. There's a lot we don't know about this because it's not really a party yet. It's just like a giant listserv. I think they have 800,000, possibly a million people. So it's very promising at the beginning. There's a lot of polling that suggests that large numbers of Brits would consider voting for a party like this. But there's a lot we don't know, right? Are they going to pursue kind of tactical electoral pacts with the Greens and with perhaps the members of the Labour left who are there's still I don't know 30 MPs in the Socialist campaign group. I don't think anybody should be running candidates against them. But I'm cautiously optimistic about that.
What's George Galloway doing these days? Not
Oh,
that.
he's the last time I saw him, I think he was on Navarro Media talking about how much he disliked homosexuality. I don't know. He's he still follows me on Twitter, and every so often I get a reply from him. I'm just like, all right, I'm not going near this. I think I muted him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he is. I will say, in a very narrow sense, you could make a strong case that he is one of the best orators in contemporary British politics. His enunciation is incredible. He speaks very, very well. But yeah, I mean, look, he's a crank.
Yeah.
That's what
I,
I'd
I
say
mean,
about that.
I do occasionally listen to his podcast because he is such a great orator, the mother of all talk shows. Um, and yeah, I mean, pure crankery. Just like he'll give this really good like sort of audio essay on like Palestine, and then he'll talk about how scary trans people are, and it's like, man, get it together. But yeah, I mean, I say that in jest. I know he's always got something that he's got his fingers in some pie. I don't think he's going to save the left. Just so we're clear here.
No.
He actually blocked me on Twitter because I called him a transphobic twat. And he's like, "What did you just say?" And I was like, "I said you're a transphobic twat," and then he blocked me. And it's like, it doesn't. What you just say doesn't really work in text because it's like it's right there. You can reread it. But in any event, we've got another question from Dave. It's a good one. How can we, average folks who care but have little power, help bolster a real left movement? Are there any recent examples of success that stand out amongst all the shit? Well, I mean, it remains to be seen, but Zoran Momdani, I mean, seems to now be sort of the um, sort of a poster boy, for lack of a better term, of how the left can win and can be largely uncompromising. Obviously he's walked back. I know I saw he. It was right after Charlie Kirk got shot, so I kind of see where he's coming from. He's like, yeah, I don't think the NYPD is racist. I'm sorry I said that, right? But I mean, he did it. I think he is a generational talent that is very good at speaking to people and not being condescending and meeting them where they're at and advocating policies that work for most people. And interesting because we were talking about abundance, and one thing Zoran said, I think this was during the primary, so when most people, including myself, didn't think he was actually going to win, I remember him saying we need an abundance for the 99%, right? And
Mhm.
I think that really, taking these liberal sort of slogans and being like, yes, but we need this for everyone, right? We need, and I think he's going to win. I saw this Republican operative speak at a conservative Canadian conference a few weeks ago in Calgary. Um, who was pretty confident Zoran was going to win. So I think he's going to win. Obviously, he's not going to be able to do everything we want him to do, or he says he's going to do. But and it will be interesting to see how he navigates that. Because I think that hey, if you're upfront with voters being like, hey, I wanted to do this. Here's why I can't do this. But I'm supporting this other thing that is a step in that direction. I think that would go a long way. Obviously, there are always going to be people that are going to be like, oh, he's a fucking sellout. I mean, there already are. Um, and again, not perfect. And I mean, we shouldn't, put so much faith in like elected politicians, right? Like, we should support those who are at least going to inch things in our direction. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, that's just to me when I hear an example of someone of like a leftist politics that has worked, pending the results in the election, I believe next month. Zoran is the one person who stands out to me. But I don't know, Luke, do you have any other examples?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is with the Memdani phenomenon, it's very easy. If you just heard about him a few months ago for the first time, and you see his videos, and really, really slick, right? These really, really effective. He's a really effective communicator. He's got some great people working for him on his campaign. It's very easy to get the impression, which is a mistaken one, that this is sort of like a guy who's really talented just came out of nowhere. And obviously there's, a certain sense in which that's true, but there has been 10 years of organizing in New York City, in DSA, in Working Families Party. People have done, on innumerable campaigns, tons and tons of work to build up the kind of coalition and the kind of organizational muscle that looks like it is about to deliver, what by any standard is probably, one of the most significant, going to be one of the most significant left electoral victories in, I don't know, certainly modern American history, right? A DSA mayor of New York City. Um, we're going to have to see what happens. I think, the roof is going to fall in. There's like electing historically, if you go back to, I don't know, the early 20th century, the American Socialist Party, when it existed, had success in places like Milwaukee. People know this from Wayne's World 2, is it? Milwaukee is only city in America to have elected three socialist mayors. Thank you, Alice Cooper, for that piece of trivia.
Alice
New
Cooper
York.
has bad politics, though, right?
I have no idea what his
I remember
politics are,
reading
but
that. I think he's a big like right winger. But anyway, sorry. Go on.
but regardless, New York City is a different kettle of fish, obviously, right? New York City is not just a big city. It's one of the global centers of commerce and finance. Um, it's it's one of the great playgrounds of the global elite. So having a socialist mayor is really is going to be really significant. And just to return to the question, because I realized it was Dave, I believe, who asked it. I've digressed somewhat from it. um like the question is like I it's it's well taken, and in some ways I realize it's probably an unsatisfying thing for me to answer, saying oh, it's just get involved in these little campaigns, it's a million little acts. But generally speaking, that's what a lot of political life is. And then every so often, it yields these really big uh, dividends. And sometimes it's not always apparent when, like, with like whatever you have in front of you, that this is going to be important. But it absolutely can be.
I think that's a great note to conclude on. Much more hopeful note. Unless anyone, I'll give you a minute for other questions. I know Revolutionary Party of Canada asked about Eve Engler, um, which is a bit of can of worms. I would just say, in short, I don't think he's the guy to lead leftist movement. He's written a lot of good books. I'll say I think his public persona is unhinged, and I'll leave it at that. But Avi Lewis, maybe. We'll see what happens. It looks like it's going to be Avi versus Heather in the NDP leadership race. Might be some other surprises. Maybe Eve will make it to the final ballot. I feel like he's gonna get disqualified one way or another. But I think Heather, though, the Revolution Party, you asked about the NDP pivoting to the center, and I think Heather represents essentially continuity from the Singh years, but with a different style of communicating than him. But fundamentally, like a center left uh, uh, party that doesn't go hard left, but certainly isn't going to move to the center. I mean, I don't think so. The way Heather's been speaking recently, if you look at her non-campaign campaign events, like I think she is really playing up the sort of social democratic element of the NDP, which I don't think is her natural place. But she was my MP till I got redistricted overriding, and I quite like her. But I think Avi is, if we're talking about sort of building the NDP into like a movement of the left. I think Avi's not a perfect candidate, but I think he's the guy. And one more person reminds me. I just wrote about her, Emily Lowen, with the Green Party of BC. If you look at her platform, some very exciting stuff. I think there's a good chance she'll win if they can actually vet all the new members she signed up by next week. It'll be exciting to see a climate activist who's in her 20s, lead the third party in BC. Anyways, sorry, I was just got carried away rambling. I'm very bad at goodbyes. Thank you all who tuned in. And thank you again, Leek, for joining me today. I think it was a really great chat. We'll have to maybe go live and talk about the NDP leadership race once it, once it takes form.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jeremy, and thanks so much all of you. It's about 100 of you now. Thanks so much for for tuning in. Like and subscribe and all that. I'm at Substack on lukewsavage.com.
Yeah, subscribe to Luke's Substack. Always insightful. Always learn a lot. Reading him, and if you don't already subscribe to me, you should do it because if you enjoy
Because Jeremy's good too, and if you've come here via my Substack, you should follow the Orchard. Jeremy's doing great independent investigative reporting and other writing that is very much worth following. So, cheers, everyone.
All right, peace out.
Bye.
All right.